I'm going to be brief. I just want to say something to give a sort of institutional and historical context for today's event. For many of you who have been at UMass for years, you know that this place has been a community that has always welcomed its veterans. I was most fortunate myself coming back from Vietnam in 1969 to find my way into the buildings in Park Square and find a home where there were many other veterans who were returning, who had many questions and many issues, and found a university community that was willing to listen, to pay attention, and to respect those concerns, and to hear our voices. In my time here, I've seen veterans from World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Panama, Lebanon, the first Gulf War, and now from Afghanistan and Iraq. Previously, we saw them coming back from the wars and joining us at the university. Now we see them being taken away from the university and sent off to the wars, and then trying to make the difficult transition back. And this is a place where that transition, I think, is supported, where we as a university support query, dialogue, and look for answers. There's no doubt that the costs of the war are immense, and that we need to find ways to effectively end wars and to address these consequences, both in the long and the short run. You'll hear from many of Massachusetts veteran leaders today, people who have been working for 30, 35 years with veterans in the veterans community, as well as recently returning veterans. This is part of the university's mission. We call today's symposium The View from the Ground, because we're not imposing ideological views. We're looking at the view from the ground, the view from the people in the community whose sons and daughters are sent off to this war and other wars, the views of the people at the university. We're trying to find ways to make peace and to ensure that there are no more wars in the future. On that note, I'd like to ask Primo Vanicelli to come up and say a few words of welcome from the provost. Our provost is a disabled veteran, and Primo has been someone who's been a mentor of veterans for many, many years, helping support them, working with them, and many of them have gone on, his students have gone on to be teachers. So let me welcome Primo Vanicelli.
Good morning. I'm trying to impersonate Provost Paul Fontaine. He could not be here today. He felt very strongly, however, that he should be represented. And I have the honor or the whatever to be here and do it. Basically, he wanted to convey to you very strongly, as Kevin was implying, the commitment of this university, which goes all the way back to its very beginning in the 1960s. In fact, in my own personal experience, as well as the administration of the university as a whole, in many ways, I think the very character of this university over the years has been very much shaped and influenced by the presence of veterans. I can witness this myself in the classroom, the campus life, the way in which veterans bring, sadly sometimes, or quite often, a sense of the world which we would not have without their presence. And thanks to the Joiner Center, I think over the years, and today's event is just the last example of it, we have tried very hard to make a contribution as an institution to understanding of conflict and the consequence of those conflicts, the impact on society, and so on and so forth. Basically, my role is to convey to you the official sense of the administration of its ongoing commitment to the work of the Joiner Center, and that the institution as a whole wants to continue very strongly to play its role as we continue, sadly, to deal with problems of war and peace and the consequences, veterans which will always be welcome in our classroom, in our life here. And I should mention that Chancellor Motley will be at 11, so that's why I'm not speaking on his behalf. I think he will reinforce and give his own interpretation as to how we stand as an institution to welcome you. Thank you.
To start off the program very appropriately with the person who is in many ways the reason we're here today. I was on sabbatical till February, but in December and January I was reading about Representative Marty Meehan's trip to Iraq and his working on a solution to bring our troops back, to bring peace to that country, someone who was looking for a solution, who was looking for answers. And I found that remarkable. You can't escape this university even if you're on sabbatical, and you can't escape Massachusetts politics. So we're very fortunate in being able to have him here today and have him here after the release of his report, which many of you will find in front of you. Being a person from Massachusetts, I'm always looking for something interesting or new to say about introducing someone who represents us. I went to the web yesterday and found there's Marty Meehan, who's a Sinn Féin counselor in Armagh. There's a Marty Meehan who's also a great flutist. I knew that from my time in Ireland. But we have the man himself here today, and I'm not going to take any of his time. He's someone who's courageously come forward and put together a plan, and it's a plan that I think that we need to be looking at, and I think we need to be supporting. And I really thank him for coming here today and giving his time and sharing his words and his thoughts with us. Marty Meehan.
Good morning, and thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here at UMass Boston at the William Joyner Center, and I thank all of you for being here. I want to thank the Provost, Kevin Bowen, Paul Camacho, the Director of Special Projects here, who extended the invitation, as well as all of the veterans and veterans organizations that are represented here, as well as students. And I have to laugh when to hear about Martin Meehan of Sinn Féin. When I was growing up, I grew up in Lowell, and I was about 9 or 10 years old, and my father's name was Martin Meehan as well. And Martin Meehan over in Belfast he was involved with the IRA and get sentenced to spend some time in a British jail. And it was on the front page of the Lowell Sun, and I came home and I saw Martin Meehan and sentenced to jail, and I ran into my mother and said, "Where's Dad? Where's Dad? You know, what is going on here?" And so years later, I was meeting in Belfast at the Rod Macaulay Club in Belfast with Jerry Adams. And I told him the story, and Adams picked up the phone, dialed the number, and said, "Martin, get over here. I wanted for you to meet someone the same name." And sure enough, if Martin Meehan, who's now won election for Sinn Féin, doesn't show up within a matter of 20 minutes. But in any event, it reminded me of being a kid and being nervous that my father was end up getting in trouble. I want to speak about Iraq policy today and where it's going, but I'd first like to recognize the Joyner Center for the vitally important work that you do. The impact of every war, whether it's World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the first Gulf War, or today's wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the impact is felt for decades after the last shot is fired. Yet as a country, we don't dedicate nearly enough to understanding the impact of war on veterans, families, and communities. I believe that's reflected in the misplaced priorities of too many people in Washington. Last month, the President sent to Congress a new budget request. He's proposing spending billions of more on defense. He's going to propose an $80 billion supplemental budget, but he's cutting benefits to this nation's veterans. Now, it's inexcusable and indefensible that we can find trillions of dollars for tax cuts, but can't find the money for the VA health care. We're giving out signing bonuses to new enlistees because we're in dire need for new soldiers, but we're ignoring the veterans after they come home after serving. I think it's time for us to start serving veterans the way they served us. And I think that the Joyner Center has been supportive of veterans in helping us understand war and the many consequences of war. We usually measure the cost of the war in Iraq in terms of lost lives and dollars spent. As of this week, 1,500 Americans, 1,500 have been lost in Iraq. The taxpayers have been asked to spend $200 billion, as I mentioned, with another $80 billion request coming. But the impact will also be felt in the lives of men and women who are returning from the war zone. I regularly visit Walter Reed Hospital in Washington. And for those of you who don't know, Walter Reed is the place where the 18, 19, and 20-year-olds who are coming back from Iraq, having lost arms and legs, are sent for rehabilitation. And when you visit there, you come to understand what war really cost. And we can never forget that for every soldier whose injury you can see, there are so many more whose injuries are below the surface. The New England School of Journal of Medicine recently did a survey of hundreds of soldiers and Marines returning from Iraq. 89% of them said that they had been attacked or ambushed. 89%. 81% had fired shots. 95% had been shot at. 94% had seen dead bodies. And 86% had known someone who was killed or injured seriously. The study found that 1 in 6 soldiers returning from Iraq are suffering from major depression, generalized anxiety, or post-traumatic stress disorder. Since the war began 2 years ago this month, more than 1 million American men and women have served in Iraq. And I don't think it's enough to just send them off with yellow ribbons. We need to welcome them home with gratitude, support, benefits, and a first-class health care system. To borrow a line from Arthur Miller, the great playwright who died last month, attention must be paid. Attention must be paid to every veteran returning with physical or mental scars. And I'm convinced that not nearly enough attention is being paid. The most troubling part of the New England Journal study could be that 1 in every 4 veterans returning home with severe mental health problems, 1 in 4 have sought or received treatment. Under the policy of the Pentagon until very recently, and those of you who are Vietnam veterans know this well, when soldiers returned home, all they did was fill out a questionnaire about their health. And since most soldiers wanted to just get home, they didn't want to complement things by checking off more boxes than they needed to. And of course, there's a terrible stigma associated with mental health disorders. As a result, thousands of veterans suffering from PTSD may have slipped through the cracks. That's one of the reasons why last October I began speaking out about PTSD. Specifically, I proposed that the Congress require the Department of Defense to give every soldier heading home a thorough physical and mental health examination. The truth is that the Pentagon is only beginning to understand this issue. In January, they announced that every soldier will be screened for PTSD 3 to 6 months after their return. It's a step forward, but it's still not enough. As a senior member of the House Armed Services Committee, I'm going to monitor this new policy to make sure that it's comprehensive and service-wide. The most importantly, we're going to have to fight to restore the cuts in the President's budget and make sure that we pay for first-class health care for every single one of our veterans. As a member of the House Armed Services Committee, I make the welfare of our troops in the field, in the theater, a top priority. And in January, I traveled for the second time to Iraq and Afghanistan at the request of military families in my district to check up on our efforts there. And I have to tell you that what I found was very disappointing. What I found in Iraq is that despite a failing policy, the administration's plan is essentially to continue along the same course with no end in sight. This month marks 2 years since the President ordered the invasion of Iraq. He rushed to war using false intelligence without international support, with no plan to win the peace. It's interesting because in 1999, when the President was running for President, he was a governor, and Governor Bush criticized President Clinton for not having an exit strategy in Kosovo. He said, and I quote, "Victory means exit strategy, and it's important for the President to explain to us what his exit strategy is." When President Bush sent our armed forces into Iraq, we had no exit strategy and therefore no victory strategy. And it's unacceptable that 2 years later we still don't have an end game. The war is drawing on. The attacks on American soldiers continue. Despite the successful political milestone of Iraqi elections, the violence in the country continues to grow. Iraq is less secure than it was a year ago, not more so. In the absence of an exit strategy, we're pursuing the same strategy that has only led to more casualties. With more than 100,000 American troops occupying Iraq for 2 years, there's more violence in Iraq, and the insurgency there is only growing stronger. I came back from the Middle East determined to fundamentally try to rethink our policy in Iraq, and my thoughts on the matter are in the white paper that my staff has distributed entitled Iraq, Light at the End of the Tunnel. I'm of the opinion that our experience in Iraq and the evidence we have points to one conclusion: the current strategy isn't working. In fact, I believe that our current strategy in Iraq is doing more to fuel the insurgency than to suppress it. Over the last year, for example, we've increased troop presence in Iraq from 115,000 to 150,000. We've killed or captured more than 1,000 to 3,000 insurgents every month for over a year. Let me repeat that. We've killed or captured 1,000 to 3,000 insurgents every month for over a year. But with thousands of new recruits, the insurgency has actually quadrupled in size, from at least 5,000 to at least 20,000. And that doesn't include the 100,000 to 200,000 average Iraqis who are aiding and abetting the insurgency. Because you see, the insurgency is really a loose alliance of different factions from within Iraq who probably disagree on more than they agree. But they're being united and driven by this sense that Iraq is a country under foreign occupation. Now, 65% of Iraqis oppose the presence of U.S. forces, including 68% of the Shiites and 80% of the Sunnis. That's according to the latest Zogby poll. The insurgents wouldn't be able to operate if they weren't getting help from the civilian population in the form of arms, sanctuary, and perhaps the most important, intelligence. This is a native insurgency. 96% of the insurgents that we've captured in Iraq are Iraqis. Military strategists say that the only way to defeat an insurgency is to win the support of the people. The center of gravity in this type of war is not the insurgents, it's the civilian population. And the administration's strategy to fight the insurgents until every last one of them is killed or gives up is not a strategy that'll work. But the problem with it is that it's only going to prolong the violence indefinitely. Iraq has a population of 25 million people with a median age of 19 years old. 30 to 40% of the Iraqis are unemployed. They have access to 250,000 tons of explosives and 4,000 shoulder-fired missiles left over from the old regime that we failed to secure because we didn't have a plan to secure it. The fact is that no conventional military strategy is going to win this kind of war. In fact, in many ways, the heavy American presence in Iraq is impeding progress. A month ago, Iraq held elections that were successful in most of the country. I found these elections were inspiring, but they're only a first step. The harder part is still ahead. Iraq's transitional government now has to write a constitution and build security forces that are capable of taking over the responsibility for security. As long as we give Iraq's new leaders an open-ended guarantee that we'll be there to protect them, we reduce the incentive for them to make the concessions to involve more Sunnis in the drafting of the Constitution. And without a time frame for bringing our forces home, there's no urgency for the Iraqi security forces to get up to speed and to take primary responsibility for security. Finally, any government that is viewed as dependent on America is going to lose credibility and support. We need to change the dynamic in Iraq, and I believe the best way to accomplish this is a timetable for withdrawal. Now, I've proposed what I think is a reasonable, responsible exit strategy. It says that as soon as possible, President Bush and the new Prime Minister, who is about to be elected, would announce a flexible timetable for a phased drawdown of U.S. forces over a 12 to 18-month period. Part of this would be that the United States would make clear that we have no intention of staying in Iraq permanently. We need to make that absolutely clear, because the bases and the runways that we're building in Iraq, the pouring of concrete in Iraq, are sending the opposite message. And as soon as possible, we need to shift our focus from engaging in combat against the insurgents to training Iraqis to do the job themselves. And the only way to improve security is for the Iraqis to be up front and Americans in the background. That's when you saw when the elections were held. One of the things that they did effectively is they had Iraqi soldiers at polling places so that the Iraqis were frisking the other Iraqis who were voting. They were going through the process. Americans were in the background. That's what we need to accomplish. Finally, as we draw down our military presence in Iraq, we need to step up our economic assistance. We need a Marshall Plan for Iraq that focuses on creating jobs for Iraqis, not profits for foreign contractors like Halliburton. Under the plan that I've proposed, the United States would withdraw most of our forces, a majority of our forces, by this year or into early next year. By next summer, a small contingent of troops, 20 to 30,000, would assist in training the Iraqi forces. By making it clear, I believe, that we're only temporarily there, not permanent occupiers, our forces won't be magnets for violence. A timetable, I believe, would splinter insurgents groups who, as I've said, they've set aside their differences in order to unite against the United States. It would make clear to Iraq's leaders that as soon as possible, they'll be responsible for their own security. It would enhance the credibility of the Iraqi government, and also would enhance America's credibility around the world. And I believe that that would be this light at the end of the tunnel for our troops as well as American taxpayers. We're spending $1.6 billion a week in Iraq. $1.6 billion a week. When I was in Iraq, I met with many of our soldiers and Marines. They're ready to serve any mission. They're accomplishing things all over the country. But they and their families, I think, deserve a reasonable expectation of when this mission will end. And with all of the tragic mistakes that have been made so far, no strategy in Iraq was without risk. Nobody has a plan that will be without risks. The question is, what strategy will give us the best chance of achieving our most basic goal, which is a stable, self-sufficient Iraq that doesn't threaten its neighbors around the world? I believe that a strategy of a phased drawdown according to a flexible timetable, one that gives our commanders the flexibility that they need, but still makes clear that the majority of our forces will leave Iraq over the next 12 to 18 months. Our strategy has to change, and the Congress has to get more involved in shaping policy. The President is asking Congress for another $80 billion. The worst thing that Congress could do is write a blank check without ensuring that we have a real plan to get them out of Iraq. And that is why I've been urging members of the Armed Services Committee this week to have full hearings and full consideration of this $80 billion request. We don't have hearings in the Armed Services Committee. It's an $80 billion request with no accountability, without an exit strategy. I'll close and be glad to answer any questions that any of you might have. Last month, in defying the threats of violence and going to the polls to cast their votes, the Iraqi people proved that they are willing to take the risk, to risk their lives, to determine their country's future. Iraqis want to be independent, not just on paper, but in reality. The millions of Iraqi people that voted were voted because they believe that they can run their own government. Make no mistake about that. Thanks very much for inviting me. I'd be glad to answer a couple of questions if anyone has.
In past wars, the mindset was always man the equipment. This war, the mindset is equip the men. Where are we in terms of ensuring that they have not only the necessary equipment to fight, but the necessary equipment to keep them safe?
Well, I thought the Pentagon did a terrible job of getting our soldiers equipment that they needed. You saw Secretary Rumsfeld say, well, you go to war with the army you have, not the army you'd like to have. This was a war of choice. And to send men and women into harm's way without the Kevlar vests that are needed to protect them, to not up-armor Humvees. I mean, the majority of the Americans that have killed by these explosive devices, they could be protected under certain conditions if they had these up-armored Humvees. It's inexcusable and indefensible. And it took literally a year and a half to 2 years to get it done. What's really bothering about is the cavalier attitude of the Pentagon about this. I mean, I was in Iraq. There were troops that told me that they didn't have enough water at certain points, never mind equipment. We have families that are sending men and women who are serving equipment because they don't have it on their own. I've attended too many funerals of people who have died, soldiers who have died, where the parents stand up and say, and show me letters from soldiers that say, we don't have enough equipment, we don't have Kevlar vests. Can you try to find out, our Humvees aren't updated. We invest millions of dollars in technology, but it doesn't do, and it's right here in Massachusetts over at Natick Labs. They do a great job of trying to make sure we have the best possible equipment for our troops. It doesn't do anyone any good, if we don't get them to the troops. And I think it's inexcusable and indefensible. One of the things we've done in the Congress is force the Pentagon through amendments to the defense bill, amendments on the floor, and raising the issue as much as we can. And frankly, there have been service members' families who have done a great job in getting the message out. But isn't it a shame to think that in order for our troops to get what they need, that family members have to mobilize and do radio talk shows and speak out and show the letters of their loved ones who are serving in Iraq that don't have the equipment that they need? I mean, there's just no other way to put it. And we need to do a better job at that. Yep.
Morning, Congressman.
Good morning.
Everything you said is very important, but I want to go a little further and ask about training of our veterans as they come out of a conflict like this, or I'd like to ask you about training of our veterans as they come out of a conflict like this, and if you're looking at that, as I've been involved in training veterans for a long time, it's a subject very dear to my heart, and I noticed that as I look through budgets and I read the voluminous budget that was just proposed, Department of Labor, Department of Education was cut, and much of the veterans funds for training were cut. We in Massachusetts lost a great deal of training funds recently through VWIP, but I'd like to know where you stand and perhaps what you're proposing.
Well, first of all, you can't take care of veterans, take care of education, take care of health care when you basically have trillions of dollars worth of tax cuts that go to the wealthiest Americans. The defense budget is the only part of discretionary spending that the administration seems to have no qualms about increasing, but that defense increases never seem to go to the equipment and much of the training that's needed. We don't do nearly enough. I visit with the troops all over the country in bases and also all over the world. I've been in Kosovo and Iraq a couple of times, and Afghanistan, and what I see from people who are serving the military is basically the majority of them serve because they want to be able to get an education. They want to be able to become a school teacher or a firefighter or a police officer. And they're looking for a way to get skills and training that will result in them being in a better position to support their families and have a better quality and standard of life. I mean, that's who serves in the military. All you have to do is talk to them long enough. And we aren't doing nearly enough. Every aspect of training and education has been cut in this President's proposal. It's been cut over a period of years. To make matters worse, and this university has been a wonderful place for veterans to come and get the education and training that they need in order to reach their full potential. If you looked at the Boston Globe last Sunday and look at the cuts in scholarships, the cuts in monies available, and then the cuts in public higher education in Massachusetts generally, you see that we are going to pay a very severe price by the lack of. We don't do nearly enough, and we are going to have proposals to dramatically increase spending. We're going to lose the votes, to be honest with you. I see Barney Frank has come in, and he will tell you that we lose all the time when we propose increases in funding. And the mentality and the priorities and the values are backwards in Washington. And you see a lot of the waving the flag, and everybody has a yellow ribbon on their automobiles, and all of that is really great. But when it comes time to putting up, we're not doing nearly enough. Not nearly enough. Thanks.
To piggyback off that last question, we have a significant number of veterans returning that aren't, for a variety of reasons, interested in getting back to school. However, they are interested in finding employment. Our job is one of the main ways that we define ourselves. And I think that I'm seeing government agencies, I see local towns, state, looking to bypass veterans' preference. And it's of great concern. There's an implied contract between a man that joins the service and his government that when he gets out, that there's going to be some benefit for what he's done. I've spent the last 20-something years working for government agencies, and I see the government itself hiring outside of veterans' preference. I see local towns and cities bypassing guys for firefighter jobs and police jobs. And I think it's something that we need to mandate to take care of these guys that have taken the couple of years out of their life and put their life on the line to keep ours safe and secure.
My mother has an expression when I'm maybe getting a little too full of myself. She wants me to do something. She'll say to me, "Eaten bread is soon forgotten." And her point is, look, I raised you, you little wise guy, get this done right away for me. And look at that. Isn't that the truth, though? People forget. We should have preferential treatment for veterans. We've got to provide more training, more benefits. The health care system, I was over at Bedford VA Hospital with my colleagues Ed Markey and John Tierney on Veterans Day, basically having a protest to make sure they keep the Alzheimer's unit open. Can you imagine? And it was cold, and you have families and people in wheelchairs having a protest so that they won't close the hospital. I think the most effective thing that we all can do is speak out about it. And, I've had instances in my district in Lowell, they wanted to locate a veteran shelter. And all the businesses around the location where they want to locate the shelter, they're all against it. We can't have, all these people walking around and living in this area. Some of them may have problems. It'll hurt business. And you know what? We fought the neighbors on it. We fought the businesses on it. And now that particular center in Lowell is making significant contributions to that neighborhood. So eaten bread is soon forgotten, and the most effective way to get the message out is to speak out about it. Yeah.
When do you think they feel in Washington about the new proposal to charge veterans to get into the VA system of $250 and the increased copay for prescription medication?
They're looking for ways to make up for the tax cuts that they've already approved. If you look at what's happened, we're basically in a deficit situation because of huge tax cuts. And as I said, they're trying to do the same thing with Social Security. If you look at the Social Security proposal, there's a windfall elimination. Even if you enter the stock market and made money, they cut your benefits by 70%. Mm-hmm. So they're trying to cut as much spending as they can in order to pay for the tax cuts. And that's really what it's all about. And if you ask me what is the attitude in Washington, you saw the results of the last election. We lost 4 seats in the House and 4 in the Senate, and it is a battle. And the mentality is if they can get away with it, they're going to do it. If they can get away with it, they're going to do it.
Because we have this returning influx of veterans now. Okay, as you said, they're traumatic amputees, so they're service-connected. Okay, so they go into the VA system. The VA system can't handle it because they've already faced with a $900 million budget cut. 90% of their workforce, as the paper says, they're close to retirement. VA Voc Rehab alone, the youngest guy to recently retire is 73 years old. We won't have the services, nor will we have the personnel to take care of these people. I have no idea what
The great thing about the equipment that many of the troops have gotten is that many lives have been saved by the technology advances over the last decade. The bad news is the Pentagon doesn't have a clue as to how to deal with so many amputees. They just don't have a clue. What is a psychological... I mean, I've got a 19-year-old kid who goes out with my niece who lost his leg and the use of his right arm. And he hasn't even come to grips with it yet. And he really isn't getting the type of... Remember the screening I talked about and the evaluation. Who's going to evaluate how he's going to deal with this mentally? We haven't even begun to deal with that. And as I said, all you have to do is go to Walter Reed Hospital to see it. It's incredible.
Congressman Christine from the New England Shelter for Homeless Veterans. We have a very effective PTSD program at the shelter. And it treats mostly Vietnam-era veterans like myself. But it's clear to us that coming down the road in a year, not more than a year, will be some of the folks who've been over in Iraq. Are your colleagues, and do you get the sense the institutions in Washington, really are beginning to understand the need for PTSD counseling and training, and will take a different attitude and make more resources available to a variety of institutions like ours, as well as the VA, to treat this particular problem?
Like I said, the policy has changed in January, so that at least within a period of 4 to 6 months is going to be an evaluation. So I believe they're beginning to get it. All they have to do is talk about to Vietnam-era veterans. But on the other hand, I think it's really important when they say they're going to do something to make sure that they actually do it. So we're going to have to look to see what kind of evaluations there are, whether there's follow-up, whether or not all of the people that come back go through this exercise that was just instituted in January. It's very early to tell. Do they get it? Look, at any time you have a government that puts more of a priority on tax cuts than they do on taking care of people who are actually fighting the wars, the people who actually need the health care and the education and the benefits. I wouldn't say they get it, but I will say that they've responded in this particular instance. What we ought to do, and you should follow up with me, I'm going to be asking the General Accounting Office to look at this new procedure and whether or not they got all of the veterans they should have gotten, whether or not the screening process that they've instituted makes sense. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.